Hello all. We are going to start the session now. I will give a brief introduction about our expert. So, Dr. Sujala Sethi ma'am has 23 years of teaching experience. She is working with BITS Pilani, Dubai campus since September 2002. Previously, she had worked in Manipal Institute of Technology, Manipal, in the computer science department. Her research areas are big data, artificial intelligence, IoT, web services, and network security. Today, she is going to talk about artificial intelligence and its real world applications. Over to you, ma'am. Welcome you again. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Jugal, for your very warm welcome. So I'd like to just briefly just give an introduction to what exactly I will be talking about. So I've been teaching this particular area of artificial intelligence, and all of us know that no, it is a very fast evolving area which is constantly developing. So it becomes kind of very important that even those of us who are involved with this area, we keep kind of updating ourselves. So the little bit of the attempt that I am doing to actually work in this particular area, maybe I will just share with you the research that I have done over the past 1 year. So different kind of assignments or different projects and thesis, and maybe even the research scholars who are working with me, they are working in this particular area. So maybe I'll just walk you all through what exactly is it that we've done, and just a little bit of an insight into the work as well as the publications that has been an outcome of this work. So coming to this particular area of artificial intelligence, and it becomes very important because nowadays we see that applications of artificial intelligence are not just theoretical, but we see that in many real life applications, we see that somehow this is coming into the forefront, and it is not something that maybe some years back we could say that no, it was more of kind of science fiction or something like that. But currently we see that many of us are interacting with it, maybe knowingly, unknowingly, but in many ways we are interacting with AI systems. So they are something that is going to be here to stay. It is going to be for maybe a very long future ahead that we have. So it is definitely going to be an area which has a lot of potential for maybe students, people who are looking at working in the industry, for researchers, for academicians like us, for many people. So coming to artificial intelligence, maybe just to give you a broad overview. So like we just discussed now, there is going to be many different applications that you look at. So in many cases, it could be something like maybe our phone itself. So even if in case you're looking at our phone, nowadays phones are not just going to be any kind of a dumb device. It has become very smart. So even if in case you're looking at taking a picture, there are so many ways in which you can enhance the quality of your picture. You can increase brightness, maybe dim the background, so many different things. You can interact with your phone maybe by using applications like Siri, Cortana. So you have a lot of these voice bots. You have self-driving cars, which is again become a very significant area. It could be self-driving cars, it could be things like unmanned vehicles, it could be drones. So all these areas are going to be where we will see a lot of applications. And many times it could be areas where may not be very conducive for a human being. Like you're sending something up to Mars, you want to explore the surface of the soil. So any kind of a rover, a drone, a bot. So things like this may be as a hazardous environments. Like you have to go and pick mines in maybe a war-torn area, or it could be something like maybe exposing yourself to maybe hazardous paint. So maybe something where you're looking at cars being painted. So these could be many different applications. And nowadays many of us see, you call up a bank, you call up maybe an airline, you call up an airport. Many times it may even happen that you're not going to be interacting with a human being. So it might most probably be a voice bot that is going to be. So again, this is going to be things which are going to be, they are all enabled because of the vast development in the field of artificial intelligence. And if in case we say, why is there been so much of development and interest in this particular area, it could mainly be attributed, say, to 2 or 3 different things. So firstly, it could be the availability of huge volumes of data, because when we're looking at supervised learning, availability of data becomes important. So we will see that even as researchers, many of you all would have seen some years back, access to data was not at all available. But nowadays we see that in many cases it could be platforms like Kaggle or UCI repositories where data sets are made available publicly to people. So that is how work could go on. Another area could be because of the strong algorithms that have been developed over these years. And third, and very importantly, it is going to be because of the good advancement that you have in your hardware technology also. So it could be in terms of your GPUs, CPUs, it could be in terms of cloud storage. So no longer is storage going to be an inhibiting factor, because you can keep scaling up. Using cloud, you can scale up to whatever size of memory that you require. So these are different areas or reasons why artificial intelligence is what it is today. So before we start off, maybe we can just very briefly understand what exactly is an artificial intelligence system. So there have been many definitions for artificial intelligence. You look at different textbooks, maybe different books will give you different explanations. But maybe one of the very significant explanation is you're looking at building systems which can think like human beings. So how you're building a system which can play a game. Okay, so what happens over there? The computer has to think like a human being. You're looking at building a system which can be playing chess or maybe Go. So how is a human being reasoning when you're talking about playing chess? So the same thing happens when you're looking at building these systems. So it could be a system that can think like a human, it can act like a human. What do we mean by acting like a human? So like we discussed, it can be something like maybe even your chatbot, because you're acting, behaving like a human being. And now these systems have become very close. You may not many times be able to distinguish, are you talking to a computer or to a human being? So things like act, or it could be a robot. So now we can see there are things like robots which can do complicated tasks, like maybe play a game of football or things like this. As well as you can have systems that think and act rationally. So again, these would be important things when you're looking at maybe driverless cars. So a system has to think instantly. It has to decide. Okay, when it comes to a road junction, what does it do? Somebody else is stopping, but maybe the signal is still green, but you see somebody is still walking on the road. What is it that you have to do? Okay, maybe you brake and wait. So these are systems which can think and act rationally. So this becomes the whole crux of building AI systems. That is, you want to make systems as similar to human beings, both in terms of our thought process, in terms of our behavior, in terms of our rationality. Nowadays, they're even looking at eliminating bias. So how you don't want a system to distinguish between a male or a female. Okay, you don't want them to differentiate people based on race, on gender, on ethnicity, many different things. So these are going to be different things that AI systems are really doing now. So key areas, so now we see that machine learning is one of the very important sub areas that you have in the broad field of artificial intelligence. So machine learning, you have a lot of algorithms where you're kind of training a machine to act, behave, talk, whatever, like a human being. So you have machine learning, which is a very important area. Like we discussed, natural language processing is again something that is very important, because language is something which how we converse. So, and always language is going to be something that is very complicated. So you can have people who are traveling, you're going to a different country. Maybe say our sports people, our Olympic team which went to Japan. So they are not able to converse with systems in Japanese, but maybe suppose they're taking a taxi. So in this case, what would happen is maybe our person, maybe in English or Hindi, he could say type something, or he could say something onto the system. You can have a computer system that is available which will convert this language maybe to Japanese, and it will interpret it and give it to the driver. Okay, and again, the driver talks in Japanese, you can have the system which will interpret back into Hindi and give it to the user. So these are going to be natural language processing, which is a very important area. And we can think about this, like, if you're looking globally, because now the world is so very connected, if you're looking at the number of languages, you can have people conversing in English, which has to be converted to Mexican, Japanese to Korean. Okay, so the number of possibilities. So to have a computer to do all this becomes very difficult, but you have a lot of systems which have come up, which can do all this kind of natural language processing, sentiment analysis. So a lot of these things. This again has become a very key area for a lot of researchers, because of the vast potential and the many different applications where you can see these NLP systems which can be embedded in. So even nowadays you have a lot of these companies, IT companies, which are available, which have done a lot of work in NLP. And these big companies like say Facebook or Cisco, which uses it in WebEx, buys over these companies for multi-million-dollar buyovers. So this is another important area that you have, which is going to be NLP. Another important area, like we discussed, robotics. This could be in any kind of an application that you're looking at. Okay, wherever it could be a little dangerous for a human being to be there. So like we discussed, space exploration, and so many other different areas. Okay, like automation. So precision is there. A robot is never going to get tired, unlike a human being. So you know that you can have the same quality of work that is done over and over and over again. In addition to this, nowadays you have a lot of all these object detection. In the airport you're walking, they want to identify people. Okay, it can be vehicles. You have a lot of CCTV cameras nowadays. Automatically, things can be recognized, identified. You can tag certain things. So these become very, very important applications that we have again of AI. Speech recognition, like we discussed, your Siri, Cortana, okay, all this become speech recognition systems. So so this was a brief introduction that I have for AI, this area of AI. Now coming to my presentation, it will be divided into two broad areas. One of it is going to be IoT and different applications of IoT. Second is going to be recommender systems. So maybe I'll just introduce you all to what are recommender systems, different types of recommender systems. And then we look at certain work that has been done by a research scholar on scalability and accurate recommender systems, and a new area that we have, which is going to be called reinforcement learning. Okay, so this is another important area which has seen a lot of progress in the recent years. And lastly, maybe we'll just see that this would be the future direction in which we are planning to work, that is explainable and interpretable recommender systems or an intelligent application. So this is with respect to the topics that we would be seeing. So maybe we'll just continue with the next presentation. So coming to this presentation, which is going to be on the Internet of Things. So again, nowadays we know, nowadays we're looking at a more interconnected world. We're looking at devices also which are going to have an IP address. So it becomes easy for these devices to kind of communicate and interact with each other. I hope my screen is available. Have I shared my screen? Okay, I think I haven't shared my screen. Very sorry about that. So maybe just because I hadn't shared, maybe I'll just run through these slides. I won't discuss it, but these were the slides that I was talking about. So what is AI? We discussed what was AI, the key areas. So we said that it was machine learning was one of them. We had natural language processing. Robotics was another. Object detection. Speech recognition. So this is what I told you, like we would divide my presentation into two parts. IoT and different applications. Maybe we can take a 5 or 10 minute break if you all want. And then we will start off with the second part, which would be recommender systems. Okay, so coming to the second presentation on IoT. So when we're talking about Internet of Things, like we just discussed, nowadays devices are becoming more and more connected. So it becomes very important. It could be different kinds of applications. It could be in healthcare, it could be agriculture, many different areas that we could see devices which it becomes necessary that a device can be somehow connected to a system. It is able to communicate. So that is what is exactly IoT. So it is an extension of the internet connectivity into physical devices. So it could be different sensors, it could be parking sensors, it could be maybe somebody's pacemaker. It could be different devices that you're talking about. It could be humidity sensors, heat sensors, different kinds of devices. So these devices, it becomes important that these devices could be somehow controlled. Suppose you're talking about a radiation plant, and the heat in maybe the thermal heat increases so much. So in such cases, you can have a sensor which will detect the heat. In that case, you can immediately beam it to a particular device which can then regulate this heat. Okay, so maybe increase the cooling or in whatever method. So that is where we see IoT having many different applications. So if you're looking at different components of IoT, these would be the different components. First and foremost, we would have a sensor. These sensors would have to be connected, so you will have a network. Once this data is sent, because most of the time these devices are going to be smaller devices, so they may not be able to process the data. So you will collect, beam the data is going to be processed somewhere. It could be maybe on the cloud or maybe on a server sitting somewhere else. And generally, you must have a user interface for all these devices. So how is a user going to be interacting with this? Okay, so you would have a user interface. So these become the different components of the IoT. Now, coming to different IoT technologies and protocols, if we see there are different technologies that are available. It could include your Bluetooth, it could include NFCs, Wi-Fi, Zigbee. Okay, so different technologies are available, and these would have their own protocols which are also available, and they are already in place. If you're looking at different platforms which are available, so you can see Arduino is one of the popularly used, one of the earliest IoT devices that was there. Nowadays, we see more and more kind of advanced devices that are available. But Arduino is still very user-friendly. It is the code for it is going to be open source. It is easy to set up, affordable. Okay, that becomes a very important application, affordability. The next thing that we have is Raspberry Pi. So Raspberry Pi can almost be a small computer. If in case you connect it to a monitor, you connect it, so all the processing can be done on your Raspberry Pi. You can connect it to a keyboard, so input and output devices, and all this processing can be done on your Raspberry Pi. So it is powerful, it is quick, and because of this, there are a lot of different interesting applications that have been developed using Raspberry Pi. Another one that we have is going to be a BeagleBoard. Again, this is also used. So depending upon the application, a user could be picking any of these devices. Now, what is the advantages of having IoT? One thing is it can be efficient utilization of your resources. Okay, minimize human effort. So you have a sensor. Suppose you have a big farm. Okay, and you don't really, maybe you have some people who are going to be watering, who are maintaining this, but you want to keep tracking. You want to see whether your crop is healthy, whether it is getting enough moisture, whether it has enough shade. So you can have different sensors over there, and the sensors will keep beaming you the information. So in this way, that human effort is reduced. Okay, a lot of things become automated. They become more under control of people. So they save time, development of AI. So a lot of AI applications have been developed using IoT, and definitely security also can be enhanced. So these are different applications that we have of IoT. So if in case you're looking at the major elements of an IoT infrastructure, so like we discussed, you can have whatever is your IoT device. So here in this case, you can see you can have your Raspberry Pi, it could be a Google Coral, it could be your Arduino, whatever. Okay, you could have sensors. So these are going to be your data collection devices. You can have fog nodes, which are going to be nodes, it could be fog. Nowadays, we see you can have edge computing, you can have cloud computing. Cloud is when it's sending your data far. Many cases, you may not want to send data very far, you want to process it. So it happens on the edge of the network, we call it edge computing. You can have fog computing, which can be there. Okay, so you have cloud. In many cases, there can be a smaller component of a cloud, which we call a cloudlet. So these could be different forms in which your data can be processed. So this is going to be your data centers or your fog nodes, whatever. And then in addition to this, you will have your IoT platform that is going to be available. So all this data is now going to be, so you will have to use whatever is going to be the communication protocol that is going to be, like we decided or discussed, Wi-Fi, or you're using NFC, whatever is the protocol. And with using all of this, you come up with smart applications. So nowadays you see a lot of people talking about smart cities. So what are smart cities? So smart cities are going to be cities where maybe your power consumption is going to be maxed, in the sense you're used very efficiently. Okay, maybe you're talking about garbage collection within the city. This happens in a very managed and an intelligent way. So not that your garbage picking people will keep going to the same points every day and see that it is empty. Instead, if you have some sensor within your garbage box, okay, when it gets full, maybe it will send a signal to the person who has to come and empty it. So only then he will go and clean it. Okay, and similarly, you can even have it for a lot of these applications. So maybe you're talking about washrooms and all that. So in airports, in maybe busy buildings. So in such cases, maybe you can have these kind of sensors which will keep sensing the air quality. So as soon as the air quality drops, it sends a kind of information to somebody, so somebody can come and clean the washroom. Okay, so these could be different kind of applications that we're talking about with respect to IoT. So if you're looking at the most popular IoT applications, like you can see over here, like we discussed, it can be smart city, it can be smart grid, you can have smart supply chain, which is very important. Okay, like same way, you have a grocery store, you don't want people to keep going and checking it every day. Suppose you have, say, milk. When the supply of milk or the number of bottles of milk available on a shelf falls below a certain level, automatically maybe the store manager is notified. So he knows. Okay, so he can plan well in advance. He can order whatever stock seems to be reducing, such that everything is well available in his store. Okay, similarly, you can have connected healthcare, connected cars. Okay, so cars which are also going to be smart cars which are available. You can have cars in the future. They're looking at how cars can communicate, because when you're talking about driverless cars, maybe a car can communicate with another car and exchange messages or signals. So these can be many different applications where we see IoT being used. So now another important area that we see a lot of work happening is where we're looking at ML, machine learning algorithms being used with IoT applications, because we can see or we can understand IoT has a lot of applications in real life scenario. Okay, so like we discussed, it could be anything like having a smart city, a smart grid, any such application. So we are looking at smart parking solutions. So for all of this, so in the background with these IoT systems, you can have machine learning applications which can be used. So these are certain things that we see, and this will definitely increase efficiency and productivity of your different applications. Now, coming to one of the very areas where a lot of people are really interested in is something which is a smart city. So what is a city which is going to be smart? So different things that we see. So you can have fire sensors. There is a fire in a building. Immediately your fire department is alerted. Okay, so there is no loss of time. You can have energy meters, security which is monitored. So you can have a building security, but maybe this is again controlled to maybe the police station, so that they can also monitor. Anything that happens, a security breach, quickly they can also take action. You can have smart parking systems, you can have road and rail management. This is also a very important area, like if you're looking at buses. So the frequency of buses nowadays, you can see that maybe some sensors are available. You know that there are so many people waiting in the bus stand. So in such cases, what will happen? Maybe buses will leave from the bus stand and they can plan. So they can do a lot of kind of analysis. How frequently are buses used? What is the productivity? Okay, how much of capacity they're able to? How much of time is being wasted? When is the bus stand not very busy? Okay, so waste, water management, different applications that you can have. So some of the applications that we have, which we have actually worked on, is the smart parking solution. So if in case you're looking at smart parking solution, what we have actually done in this particular application that we have over here is we have what we're actually working on is to have kind of systems wherein which you have any kind of an intelligent IoT system which will have a complete layout of the free parking slots that are available. It could be in a mall, it could be in any open area, it could be like in a parking area in roads. So what happens is you have these sensors, and there can be a lot of analysis that can be done. So you can be analyzing how frequently is this, which are the free slots, how frequently do cars enter and exit. Okay, what times of the day are the slots very busy? So different kind of applications that we can come up with. So a lot of applications are already available, so that if in case you're planning to go to say one particular area in the city or to a particular mall, you can beforehand itself search and see how is the parking slot. Are there slots which are available? Is there any point in you going there? So such kind of things can be done. So this is going to be very important, because nowadays it has been seen that in very busy cities, say maybe Mumbai, for example, Delhi, any of our metro cities, or even abroad, okay, like cities like maybe California, Los Angeles, they have seen that a lot of fuel is wasted, a lot of human hours is wasted, where people are just infinitely looking for parking slots. So in order to reduce carbon emission, in order for having a better environment, a lot of these kind of solutions have come up. So you save fuel, you reduce wastage of time, okay, and you add to convenience of people. So that is why you have a lot of these solutions. So this is an application that we have built. So for this, we have actually used edge computing. So we have worked with Google Coral, but nowadays you even have NVIDIA's Jetson, which is available, which can also be used for such kind of applications. So what is the benefit of this when compared to Raspberry Pi? Because a lot of these devices, like you were talking about the Google Coral, for example, this is one of the devices that we have worked in. It already has a lot of built-in kind of networks which are available. So machine learning applications to build on these kind of platforms become very, very easy. Okay, why is that? Because the first thing that you have is it is called Edge TPU. Okay, so it is a TensorFlow platform that is used. So this Google Coral, it supports this form of transfer learning. So we will see it supports Python. It is small, it is handy, so you can have it in a lot of different applications. Power consumption is very low. Okay, this becomes an important factor because these devices may be present in a particular area over long periods of time. So the power usage also should be efficient. And inferencing detection rate is going to be very high with these devices. So this is how a Google Coral looks like. So you can see, you can again connect this to a monitor, you can connect it to a CPU, to a keyboard. It has a fan because it does a lot of processing. So it works with TensorFlow mainly, and it does a lot of Python coding. So in this case, the heat, it's a small kind of a processor. Okay, so it's almost like a GPU which is available over there. So the heat that is generated is going to be very high. So that is why it has a fan which will constantly keep rotating over here. So these are different applications. So if you're looking at applications using your Google Coral, these can be different applications that you have. So like in this case, you can see it can be used in a lot of our voice applications. Okay, like I told you, it has machine learning libraries and all that which can be loaded onto it easily. So you can have a lot of your, say, recurrent neural networks and all that which can be trained. So it is used in a lot of your voice applications. It can be used in categorization. So it sees an image, it can categorize. Is it an animal? Is it a car? Is it an object? Okay, is it a tree or something like that? So image recognition. So image recognition is another important. You can recognize faces, you can recognize objects. Okay, all this can be done. And it can also be segmenting, say, different parts of the body over here. So it can identify a face, identify the arms, the limbs, etc. So these are n number of such applications which are available. So if you're looking at the basic working flow of this Edge TPU, that is a Google Coral, you can see that it is a TensorFlow model which is available. Okay, so since this is a small device, we have to kind of compress the TensorFlow model. So we convert it into TensorFlow Lite. Okay, once it is a TensorFlow Lite, it can then you can compile the code on it, and then this can be deployed onto your Coral hardware. Okay, so this is the workflow of how exactly this Google Coral can be used. So as sample examples that they give, if in case you install, you can use this Google Coral, you will have to install all the required libraries and packages. So it works more or less with, I think, something like a Linux kind of a platform. So you will have to install all the libraries, the Python libraries and everything that is required. And these are some of the sample code that they give. So if in case you show it on your table, it can show you there is paper, there is a book. Okay, it will immediately label. So here you can see it's telling you that it could be a syringe with this probability. It could be a lipstick with this probability. Okay, so different kind of inferencing. Any questions? Okay, maybe I'll finish with this and then later maybe we can have a few questions that I can take. So similarly here you can see this is again going to be a sample code itself that they have. So they have a data set which is available, and here you can see that it is kind of labeling. It is identifying each of these cars, so it is labeled them, and it also gives you the probability of it being a car, being a truck, being a cycle, etc. So these are some of the applications. So those of you all who are interested in working in this, it is going to be very easy. Okay, you can actually purchase, it's available on Amazon or elsewhere also, a Google Coral. You can load all the necessary libraries. There are sample code which is available, and you can think of any interesting application and come up with it. Okay, so like we discussed, the benefit of this is unlike a Raspberry Pi, A Raspberry Pi, because processing is limited, it will have to relay whatever data it has to a cloud. Unlike that, in case of your Google Coral, it does on-device machine learning. So this becomes it is capable of actually processing that information by itself. So it does high performance, is local ML acceleration, better privacy, because you can do all your processing, you're not sending it. Because if it's a cloud, when you're relaying it, again, you have to take care of security. And it is power efficient. So these become different benefits of having your on-device computing or on-device machine learning application. So this is an application that a student of mine who had done his thesis, undergrad student who was doing his final year thesis, this was an application that was developed by him. So here in this case, you can see he's actually created this toy data set, because the required data set was not really available. So he created a big data set by using like a board, and he actually designed it or made it like a car parking, used toy cars, and he trained the model for both cases of it being full, which slot is empty. You place another smaller object over there, still it shouldn't allow anything to be parked there. So he's actually created this data set by clicking images, and this was used for both training as well as for testing. He defined the sequential model, used transfer learning. This is one of the important things that you have. So in Google Coral, all these, your deep neural networks are already available. So it could be a VGG net, it could be mobile net, so that you don't have to train the entire network. So that is the importance of transfer learning. You will just change your training set, the network is already available, and then you will get your required output. In addition to this, he also created a web application over here, because you will have to finally have an interface. So suppose this is a parking lot that you're trying to develop for a mall. You want to find out which are the free and empty slots. Okay, so there has to be a web interface where this can be seen. And this was executing the mobile net model. So this was with respect to this model. So here in this case, you can see that a Google Coral was used, and you can connect a camera also. So with the Google Coral, you have a camera which is available. So the camera can be connected, and that there is a specific camera which is available, and this camera can be used to capture images. So it was constantly gathering these images in the form of frames, and each time this frame was updated every 0.3 milliseconds. So you can see as soon as a car exits the parking lot, it will automatically detect that a particular slot is empty. Okay, so here you can see filled or occupied slots are shown as red boxes, and an empty slot is shown as a green bounding box. So in this case, you can have the web interface. So this information is transferred. In the web interface, we will be calculating how many slots are available, how many slots are free. In addition to this, you can even do a lot of, you can build on this application, do a lot of analysis. So you can collect all this data. You can see which time of the day the parking slot is very busy. When is it going to be free? So different kind of analysis can actually be done with this. So over here, why do we use the mobile net? Okay, so mobile net, like I told you, we're using your transfer learning. So less computation power to run or apply your transfer learning. Okay, it is a mobile net is a perfect application for your mobile devices. So mobile devices could be in the form of a phone. Okay, it could be in the form of this Raspberry Pi. And another important thing was inferencing was quick, detection was quick. Like we saw in 3 milliseconds, it was able to detect if a vehicle is present or not. Okay, and inference of 13.5 milliseconds was achieved by this mobile net app. And then in addition to this, we created a web app interface. So Python was used. So Python module, which is called Flask, was used to create your web app. And you also had, because you needed the front end, so we were using HTML and CSS. Okay, so cascading style sheet script was used for building this and displaying this information on your browser. So this was the result that we had. So the accuracy of about 99.87 was achieved. And like I discussed with you, you had to convert your TensorFlow to a TensorFlow Lite model. Okay, so we've converted it both to a testing as well as your validation data set. So this was with respect to validation set, and this is with your testing data set. Okay, so it achieved close to 100% accuracy. So it was able to correctly label when cars, and we tested it with different lighting parameters, when it is brightly lit, when it is less illuminated, We checked with different colors of cars. Okay, it could be a black car because the background is also black, but still it was able to detect when an object was actually found in a particular slot. So this was an interesting application. The next application that we have is another interesting application where we said that IoT, you could be using IoT for a lot of secure applications. So now when you're talking about, say, suppose you have the AC in your house, you want to have, now many times we see you can have smart systems. So maybe a AC, a light, a particular device, you want to switch on the geyser in your house before you come so that the water is ready when you come. So in such cases, what happens is you can have these IoT devices. But because if in case we see you're just having a phone which is going to be controlling this, maybe somebody else accesses your phone or somebody hacks into your phone. Okay, there is a breach of security over here. So in this case, we've introduced this concept of using Ethereum. So we've brought in this concept of your blockchain with respect, we've connected blockchain, we've connected IoT, okay, and we've connected this concept of security for this particular application. So if in case we look at this, the main reasons, some of the issues that we see in IoT is, lot of cases you see that it could be attacks because it's transmitting data maybe many times over a public cloud. So in such cases, people can hack, they can break into the system, there can be a denial of service, okay, and there can be a lot of compliance, lack of compliance on the part of IoT manufacturers. So these are some of the common issues that is seen in IoT. So here in this case, we have AI and ML-based security technique to prevent various attacks. So you can see, you can have your denial of attack or distributed denial of attack. So these are some of the techniques which are seen, which can overcome these problems. A random forest or fuzzy logic. Spoofing, this is from the papers that we have researched. Okay, so spoofing is an attack. We see that a form of reinforcement learning, Q-learning, or your support vector machine, or your deep neural network. Malware detection, again, different techniques. Eavesdropping, okay, maybe Bayesian network, Q-learning. Jamming, okay, you want to jam this, again, it was seen support vector machines. Again, these two forms are your reinforcement learning techniques, Q-learning and DQ learning. Okay, so these are different forms of attacks that we have seen in our literature review. So now coming to the blockchain mechanism that we've had over here. So what we said in this particular case is, now what happens in case of a blockchain? Okay, so here, if you look at how this entire application is working, the user will request for an application. Okay, so a transaction is represented as a block. A block is sent, so in a blockchain, as the name says, specifies, it is nothing but a chain of transactions. Each transaction becomes a block. And because you have a chain of transactions, okay, like for those of you all who are comfortable or are aware of these concepts of hashing. So what happens in the technique of hash? You will have a message which you will run it through a hash algorithm, and there is a smaller, say maybe a 256-bit hash code that is generated. Okay, so what is the significance of this hash? Even if one bit in the document changes or one character in a document changes, okay, the hash code, because it goes through such a complex process, the hash code of this one character change becomes a totally different hash value. Okay, so that is the entire concept that is taken in your blockchain also. So that is what happens over here. This transaction that you had adds to this blockchain. And now again, a new hash value is going to be generated for this entire block. And this hash value is shared with every member who's there on the blockchain. Okay, that is why these blockchains become very, very difficult to actually break into. And that is why there is so many different applications that you see of these blockchain. So that is what is the next step. So a block is sent to each node in the network. Okay, so that becomes a distributed. So it is not under the control of one person. Everybody in this network is going to be informed and they are updated. Each node will validate this transaction. Okay, nodes are rewarded for proof of work. So you always have something which is called a miner. A miner is going to be somebody who is going to be constantly going to be mining these bitcoins. Okay, so you would have some person who is going to be doing all this work. So some amount of reward is going to be given to him. So a new block is added to the existing blockchain, and then you will say that this transaction is complete. So this is the entire process that we have of this concept of using this blockchain. So what are the pros? What are the cons? Okay, so pros we know. it is fully distributed. Okay, so because it is distributed, it is not under one person's control. So because of this, it becomes highly secure. It is transparent because everybody can see whatever change happens. It is immutable. Okay, that is, there can be no change which happens without other people in this network being aware of it. So this becomes very strong benefits of blockchain. What are the disadvantages? Scaling, because like we saw, no, each transaction adds, the complete hashing technique will change. So because of this, what happens a lot, and this becomes very energy heavy, demanding applications. So that is why we see many of these times these mining applications. People who are mining these blockchains are generally going to be sitting somewhere in, say, Eastern Europe or in very cold countries, okay, because they might be having huge mining farms. So it's going to be a lot of processors which are there. These processors generate so much of heat, so it is an expensive process, okay, of maintaining these blockchains. So these are certain aspects that we have. Coming to the types of blockchains, you can have a public blockchain, there is a private blockchain, and there is a consortium of federated blockchain. Okay, so there are different types. If you're looking at the public blockchain, no one can change it. Okay, anyone can participate. So your Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, all of these are going to be types of public blockchain. Private can be, nowadays, suppose you're saying that a bank or maybe a particular shop, okay, they want their own kind of a Bitcoin or their own blockchain application. So in such cases, it becomes private. Okay, so these are going to be different forms of blockchain that you have. So how is Ethereum helping us over here? So it is controlling the identity access in this ecosystem. It is encrypting the communication between different devices. Okay, so I will just explain this to you. So we can see, like, applications of IoT, you can see it in different forms of applications. It can be you're looking at tracking certain components. Okay, some particular device, maybe you have a big, say, MRI machine. The machine is being transported from, say, Germany to, say, somewhere in Mumbai. So you can track that particular device. Okay, and how are we doing it? By having some form of IoT. So freight transportation, log operational maintenance. Okay, these become different applications that you can have of IoT and blockchain. Now there is something which is called a smart contract. Okay, so this is something that is going to be very important. So a smart contract will have to be something that will actually it will have all, like, the terms and conditions. Like, how is it? Suppose you're moving into a house, okay, or you're renting something. You will have a contract that you will sign. And what is it in the contract? Everything is laid out clearly. Okay, that you will keep your house clean. You will not be, drilling too many holes. You will not create too much of noise. You will not be a nuisance to your neighbors. So many things that you will agree to and you will sign. So the same thing happens in a blockchain. Many different people will have to agree that these are going to be the terms and conditions for using this particular blockchain, and this contract is going to be signed. Okay, so that is basically what is going to be a smart contract. So if in case we come to Ethereum, so what is Ethereum? Ethereum is, like, many of us have heard about Bitcoin. Okay, so Bitcoin is going to be one of an asset used from this technology of blockchain. So similarly, Ethereum is also a very powerful, very popular now kind of an asset which is available from your blockchain itself. Okay, so it is an application. So as you can see, it is the second popular cryptocurrency. It enables developers to build and deploy decentralized applications. Okay, so like I told you, it's something which everybody can be using. So you can create a decentralized application from which the participants of that particular application will be the decision-making authority. So lots of applications, it can be used in banking systems, or voting kind of systems, okay, where everybody has to agree or not. Okay, so you can talk about a big company which is coming out with some policy. So all the shareholders have to vote. So maybe one platform could be, you can think about blockchain which can be used. Okay, so different applications like shipping and different applications. So when we're coming to Ethereum, there are Ethereum features. One is the Ether, that is the cryptocurrency, the smart contract like we just discussed. There is an Ethereum virtual machine. Okay, that is going to be what is going to be generating these Ethereum. Okay, then you will have decentralized applications which can be developed. These are called DApps. You have decentralized autonomous organization. Okay, they allow us to create these for democratic decision making. Okay, so these are going to be different key concepts that we have with respect to Ethereum. So you can have Ethereum, Ether, which is the cryptocurrency. Okay. So many times we even say something which is called gas, like how we say fuel. So you will generally say on this blockchain of Ethereum, you might have to use a certain amount of gas when you want to perform a certain transaction. Okay. So we will just see. So the Ethereum blockchain over here will have three elements: a transaction list, it has a header, and it has a Omer list. Okay, these are the different components that you have of your blockchain. So this is an application that we have developed. So we've developed and we've come up with a good publication also in this particular application itself. So this is a smart light application. Okay, so we tested it on just a simple LED light, but it can be any application that you could be using in your house. It could be your AC system, a heating system. Okay, it could be your kitchen appliances, anything. So here we've developed a mobile application, okay, with Ethereum wallet. So it has a wallet in which certain amount of Ethereum, like I told you, Ethereum gas is actually some currency, okay, like Bitcoins. So your Ether currency is loaded over here. You have a Raspberry Pi, which we are going to be using, okay. And this, on the Raspberry Pi, you will be loading your smart contract. So on this, you will also be performing, you have your mining, which will happen. Okay, this is the miner node. And then this is going to be the LED. So the user will send a command like say switch on or switch off. Okay, if in case we did not have this smart contract, that is you did not use Ethereum, many of us would have seen, okay, using a Raspberry Pi, you can have somebody who can remotely be connecting a particular light. He can switch it on and off. Okay, so you have a light which is connected to this Raspberry Pi. Then you can have a mobile application, a web API or a mobile application in which you can have commands on and off. Okay, and this will maybe allow you to switch on and off the light. But here we've added one level of intelligence here by adding the smart contract. So what does the smart contract specify? So that you don't have anybody who will hack into your home network. Okay, it will have to be somebody who's recognized, who's authenticated, who has the right to actually give this command to switch on or off a particular device. So this is going to be specified in your smart contract. Who are the people who, maybe a particular IP address, okay, or a particular username and password. Only those authenticated people have the right to control this particular home application. Okay, so the implementation and testing of this was how it was done. So you had a miner, which is your home laptop. You had a backup miner, which is going to be the smartphone. We had a Raspberry Pi. In our particular case, we did not have a physical Raspberry Pi. So we were using a simulation, which was your QEMU. Then after this, what we will be doing is, so you use your QEMU, you will test the functions and deploy the smart contract on this Raspberry Pi. Okay, then you deposit tokens. So like I told you, you will have some amount of currency. So very small value, but some amount of Ether gas which will have to be used to operate that particular device. Okay, then you will get that particular token, check the current state of your LED. So this is going to be the flow of work that we actually had. Okay, so a similar application that we were actually thinking about, but we didn't really have time to do this, but something that can be very easily done. So here, suppose you say that you have a ward, okay, maybe a child who has a certain amount of, say, pocket money that he can use. Okay, so in this case, maybe you can say he can have, say, both the parents, or maybe the grandparents are also involved. Okay, they are also giving some money, but you want to monitor so that the child is not taking too much of money from one person and the other doesn't know. So if we have a smart contract over here, if the child raises a request for money, everybody else in the smart network, okay, maybe both the parents and the grandparents, they will all have to approve, okay, and only this much money is transferred. So in such case, what happens? There is total transparency. Everybody involved knows what is happening, and the child also becomes accountable. Okay, so maybe he will have to keep updating the parents. This is the amount that I have spent. So this is another interesting application that we were thinking of. Maybe in the future we will actually develop a system for this. Okay, and the last application that we've again developed, this was also, we've come up with a paper and it was presented in a conference very recently. So this is where we were using location tracking. So if in case we're looking at this application, this is a method for indoor navigation using your smartphone Okay, and say this was application where we were actually talking about so we had the smart parking application to guide us whether in a particular parking slot there are available slots or not. Okay, that is one end of the application. Second thing is you park your car somewhere. Now the next thing that you want to do is you want to park your car in such a way that it is like closest to maybe the shop that you want to go to. Suppose it's a very big mall. Like see in Dubai now we have the Dubai Mall, okay, which is a huge mall. So if in case I park my car in some corner of the mall and I want to go to a shop in the other corner, it becomes very, very difficult. So instead what we do is we have an application over here which will kind of have a map, and it can have a map of the indoor layout of your mall, and it can guide us in such a way such that it can take us to the closest parking lot, and so that we can go around in the mall. Okay, so for this we developed an application. We had a mobile app, so this was developed on Android using Android Studio. We used ArcGIS over here. So ArcGIS was the mapping software. So ArcGIS is a software which is available from Esri. Some of the tools of ArcGIS are freely available, but some of them are paid. Okay, Esri is a very big geographic information system, GIS company. It is an American-based company. So like how we have our Google Maps and all that, Esri also works with a lot of mapping information, with a lot of satellite information and things like this. Okay, so this was the entire application that we actually developed. So if in case you look at this, what is the benefit of this? The challenges that you had is, it helps in accurately determining a device position, mapping and storing the locations. So we used a Mongo database over here, and we used the A-star algorithm to give us a path, the shortest path between any two locations. So if in case you look at this, this was the entire application that we developed. So at the back end, you had your data store. So the data store could be in the form of your RSS logs, it could be in the form of JSON, it could be in the form of a distributed file system. You had a server which was available over here. This was going to be using your OAuth to authenticate the users. Okay, and then they could be accessing your application. In the front end, you had the client. So the client, you could have Android application. He could be making use of Wi-Fi to actually get his positions in a particular location. Okay, so this, and you could even have a web browser. So it could be a phone application or a mobile application. It could be a web application. So this was what was designed. So like I said, we had ArcGIS software. So ArcGIS helps us in mapping a location. So it could be for indoor maps, it could be for outdoor maps also. The navigation algorithm, so we basically used your A-star algorithm. So those of you all who studied artificial intelligence or any other language, you all will know, or any other course, okay, maybe you all would have seen that A-star is one of the popular algorithms where we use a heuristic function plus the actual cost to compute this cost. Okay, heuristic is an estimate, how far a particular spot is from your goal state. So if you are inside the mall, or this could be a parking slot, and this can be a shop. Okay, so here you can specify, or maybe you're in, say now you are in one watch shop, you want to go to your clothes shop, okay, and that is available somewhere. So now you can specify, I am at this location, I want to go to this location, and you have the map of the entire area. So you use A-star algorithm, and it will give you the shortest path to move from that location to the next. Okay, so we tried this algorithm with the same thing with different algorithms, Dexter's, breadth first search, okay, LPA, so different, and we saw A-star was performing much better than the other algorithms. So that is what we used. We used Osiris server. Okay, so there are two things. So we will import the map, and we will launch this as a REST web service. Okay, and the processing was done by using your MongoDB database, which is running in the background. So this is how the front-end application would actually look like on a phone. So you had an Android phone. On this Android phone, we would have the complete layout of this place. You can specify where you are. You can specify your destination. Where is it that you want to go within the mall? You are, say, at the food court. Okay, you want to go somewhere else. So you will specify. And it would give you the shortest path of how you can be reaching this. So you know you have the map with you, it will direct you, and it will take you to that specific location. Okay, so this was another application that we had built. So this was so it gave you the shortest path between user-defined location and the indoor navigation, and we also built a Android application using your REST API and a Mongo database in the backend. Okay, so this was the particular application. What is the scope? Okay, you can come up with more energy efficient algorithm, more secure applications. You can reduce your machine and actual time that is involved in these applications. Okay, so these were the two publications that we had. So we've published that Ethereum work in a journal, which is your multimedia tools and applications, which is from a Springer. And also this second paper, this was published very recently in July 2021 at a conference in Portugal, okay, which was a virtual conference. So you can see this was the 15th multi-conference on computer science and information systems. They had a specific track on smart cities. So that is where we presented it and in this particular track. So the 7th International Conference in Smart Cities. So this is with respect to the publications and the work that we have with respect to IoT. So maybe if required, we can take a small 5-minute break. Shall we take a small break, Dr. Dave? If we can take a small, maybe 5-minute break, it is around 12:05 over here. So maybe at around 12 we can start again. So again, I'll discuss some more applications.
Yeah. Okay, madam.
Any questions or anything that anybody wants? Any clarification? I'll try and clarify your doubts.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to ask any question, you can just write in chat box as well, so that whenever we resume the session, she can address that. Yeah, ma'am. We can go for a break.
Okay.
Is it?
Oh, fine. So we'll maybe in 12:10 for me, we can join back. 12:10.
Okay.
So I think it will be around 1:40 for you.
Okay.
Yeah, fine. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, madam.
Dr. Dave, can we start off? Anybody has a question? Yeah, I think Dr. Singh has a question. So what are the
Yes,
yeah
ma'am.
what are the government organizations responsible to take care of IoT, AI, big data in India? I wouldn't really be sure because I am in Dubai, but I know that recently also there was one webinar that was arranged by the Indian Ministry. I think Indian Education Ministry or something under Government of India scheme itself. So there also they were discussing a lot about these applications in AI, ML, IoT, and things like that. I don't really remember what occasion it was, but it was from the central government. So I think all these funding agencies are now funding a lot. I think maybe anybody from India would be able to give you a clearer picture about that. How IoT, AI, big data are linked to national security. So again, all this is definitely very key areas if we're looking at security. Any form of security. So IoT will be there because of the volume of data, big data will be there, AI is definitely there. So these are not different areas that are there in which you can be saying that lot of work will be going on. So definitely you will have agencies which are going to be interested in funding. Okay, but maybe somebody from India would be able to give you a clearer picture about that. Okay. So if I can continue, can I continue, Dr. Dave?
Yes, madam.
Okay. So again, coming forward to another application that we have developed. So this was an application for something that we thought was relevant now during the COVID time. That was for mask detection and social distance violation. Okay, using CNN. So it was again a machine learning algorithm that we used. This was again a paper that we presented it at a conference. So I will give you all the details about that. So the architecture of this project was, first is we train a convolution neural network to detect both images of people wearing masks and no masks. So to detect face mask. So the first thing that we had over here, as you can see, this was a convolution neural network that we have used. So there were 2 layers of convolutions that were here. And to this, we were giving images, we were training it with both images with masks as well as without masks. And we were then flattening this layer using a dropout. And then finally, we were able to classify whether a particular person using your softmax function. So it was not a hard decision. It was a softmax decision. So probability that you're wearing a mask with this much probability, not wearing with this much probability. So we were using the softmax function over there. So this is how this entire thing. So this is going to be your input layer, the activation function. These are the probability, and finally this was going to be the output that it was specifying to you. Okay, so this is what happened over here. So this is what we were doing over here. So OpenCV was used to capture the video. The project was tested on sample videos. We've used both a webcam as well as an IP camera for this. So here you can see we're using a softmax function. So no mask with a probability of say 99.98. This person is wearing a mask with a probability of 95.95. Okay, so this was one thing. The second part of this application that we had is we used to find out social distancing violation also. Because now social distancing, we're saying maintain 2-meter distance. So in such cases, or 200-meter distance. So here we used the YOLO algorithm for object detection, and we were finding out if people are standing too close to each other. Okay, so this was the second part of the application that we developed. So if you can see, YOLO is an algorithm that is used. It is called you only look once. So in this case, you can see, given an image, it divides it into multiple grids, and then it will identify what are going to be the different objects that you have in this. So in this particular image, it identifies that there is a dog over here, there is a cycle, okay, maybe there is a vehicle, so things like this. So it can identify. So that is what we did over here. So here in this case, you've divided your image into grids and the dominant factors, okay, the important attributes, not each and everything that is needed, like not the wall or things like this. Okay, important features are all identified. So we were able to label all the objects that we were able to see in a particular image. So now the next thing that we did is, given an image, it was able to detect, draw bounding boxes for people. And wherever that social distance was violated, it was showing it in a red box. So here in this case, you can see it is detected these people over here. And then now we have to find out the distance. So what is permissible, what is not permissible. So for this, we captured the distance and we used the Euclidean distance between any two people. Okay, so the centroid of this particular person. So it draws this bounding box, gets the center. So gets the center for all the people and then finds out their distance using this particular formula. Okay, this had to be done because we were taking images in the form of pixels. So we were interpreting this image, this representation by using your pixel. Okay, so you're taking the ratio of the real height of a person divided by the pixel height of the person in the frame. So once we did this, the next thing that we were doing is, so it was a complete application that was developed. So once we developed this, you had your mask, you were looking at distance. The next thing that we had to do is, this image had to be uploaded somewhere. Okay, because you had to notify people. If in case, so say suppose it's a temple, now say Siddhivinayak opens suddenly. So many people are going to be crowding there. But if in case somebody violates this rule, what happens is, a message is going to be sent to maybe the people. So this will be an application that maybe Siddhivinayak has in their temple. So they will be able to identify as soon as two people are standing too close, they're violating social distancing norms. So a message is sent and then that particular person can contact the person and they can warn them. So for this, we had uploading the detected image to a Firebase storage. So Firebase was used here to store this image. So what is Firebase? It is a tool which is going to be used to build, improve and grow your app. Okay, so it is basically going to be like a big database which is going to be available. And it can be connected to any mobile app that you are going to be building. So this is going to be basically what would be happening over here. So you would be building your application over here. And similarly, you would have a mobile app that is also going to be connecting to this Firebase storage. So this is basically what is happening. So next thing that we used is, we used Firebase cloud messaging to push notification. Okay, so the information or this frames are going to be stored in Firebase. So they will be using their cloud messaging application to notify a particular person, okay, that this social distancing norm is not followed. Like say for example in college now for us, if students are supposed to be standing this much distance from each other, okay, but if you see students in a group, it becomes very difficult. We have security people who will keep going and checking, okay, but it may be difficult to keep monitoring this. So instead, if we have an application, maybe a message is going to be sent to the security guard that at this place this is happening. They can directly go and disperse the crowd over here. So this was the whole idea of this application. So this is going to be how we would be specifying this. So here in this case, you can see this particular application that you have. So one part of this application was to detect a mask. So here you will see that there is no mask. This is going to be to detect the social distance. We even were drawing these heat maps. So where there are more people, okay, that heat map would be represented in the form of a red color to indicate that this is an area of concern. Then we can calculate the distance between the different people. So here you can see, this was the application that we actually had. So you will be uploading all this to the Firebase. So every few seconds, it will keep updating. It will keep sending the current status of that particular location. And here in this case, you can see this was the mobile app that we had developed. So it will show you that there is social distancing, a new violation is detected, mask detection, a new violation is detected. Okay, this is going to be at the receiving end. So this is the push notification that has been sent to the person who has this application, who is using this application. So he is going to be notified and he can go and warn the particular person. So this was again an application. So this was resulted in a publication so this was the conference that you had. So it was the 23rd International Conference on Enterprise Information Systems, which was at Portugal. Yeah, so this is a prestigious conference. It is one of those core conferences. So core is like, a standard which checks the credibility of a particular conference. So this was a core conference where we were able to present this work. So this is with respect to this particular work. Now the next phase of my discussion is going to be, like we discussed, this is going to be on these recommender systems that you have. Okay, so coming to this recommender systems, maybe I'll quickly just run through this particular application. So we'll just quickly just go through this. So this is going to be a consumer behavior analysis on recommender systems. So like we just discussed, now what are these recommender systems? Okay, so if in case you're looking at these recommender systems are something which is now many of us have moved to the online platform. So we are doing our shopping online, we are entertainment like Netflix, if you're listening to Spotify, everything happens through these online platforms. And what happens, because of the huge content of data that is available, suppose you're watching Netflix or Amazon Prime, you all know every week they're releasing so many shows, so many movies. So how do we keep track of it? So what generally happens is they have systems which will recommend to you. So new movies, which will be one category, and depending upon your interest, they will recommend similar kind of movies to you. So that is going to be what are these recommender systems. So you can have it even in your shopping platforms like Amazon, because when we shop, so some people have also bought this. Okay, you will see that form of recommender systems. So we see these form of recommender systems are something that, because they're used with our real applications. With any real life application, they are used with it. So because of this, you see that there is a lot of interest that goes into this. Okay, similarly, even if in case you're doing any kind of a search, okay, a Google search, depending upon your interest, you will see some ads will keep popping up. Maybe you've purchased a ticket recently. Okay, you will see that again, similar kind of tickets and prices and everything will keep popping up. So if in case we have to, so this is a big area of research that is going on. So I have one research scholar who's actually working in this particular area. So this work that I'm discussing now is from, again, a thesis student who worked on this. So if in case we have to look at recommender systems, two broad categories that we have. We have content-based recommender systems and we have collaborative recommender systems. So content-based are one of the earlier recommender systems. They do not really have too much of intelligence. So here in this case, suppose a particular person read this particular book. Okay, so you will just see similar articles and same thing will be recommended to you. So say for example, you buy a particular soap. Okay, so similar kind of soap items will be recommended to you. So that is what happens in content-based filtering. In case of collaborative filtering, what happens is it looks at similar users or it can look at similar items, and there is a lot of intelligence which goes in over here. So nowadays you have lots of deep networks, deep neural networks which are available, which actually perform these form of recommendations. So the data set that she has actually worked in, she's doing some recommendations for movies. She has actually worked with a movie lens. This is a very popularly used data set which is available. There are about 100,000 ratings which are available of about 9,740 movies. Okay, this is what is being collected. It is available publicly as a Kaggle data set. It is data which is collected from March 96 to September 2018. Okay, so that is the data sets that we have. So in this case, this is basically how it looks like. So it is a movie ID, different movies, the title of the movie and the genre. Okay, so is it a comedy, is it a romantic movie, etc. And ratings of different people which are available over here. So this is how the data set actually is. Okay, so there are so many users and their ratings for so many different movies. So again, first we have your content-based. So content-based, like we discussed, okay, you are not really looking at too much of an intelligence. Suppose this movie is watched by a user, similar kind of movies, okay, romantic movies of the 80s. similar movies, it will just recommend to you. This was some of the code that she's actually tried. Okay, then you have collaborative filtering. Under collaborative, you have item-based, you have user-based. Okay, two types of filtering that would happen over here. So here in this case, you have a user. Item-based, a particular person uses a particular item, something similar is going to be recommended. So there is similarity. So what happens is they look at something which is called embedding. So what happens in these embeddings, they kind of look at similarities between items, and how these similarities obtained by using some kind of a function. It could be either clustering algorithms, or they use functions like, say, your cosine index to identify what are going to be items which are similar. So if it's a fruit, okay, so apples, oranges, grapes may actually be clustered closer together because the embedding or the representation of the data happens to be in that particular format. Okay, so in this case, we're talking about, you look at similarity between items and then you will recommend them. Okay, so this is item-based collaborative filtering. You have user-based collaborative filtering. So you will look for similarities between users. Okay, maybe there's same age group, okay, same kind of backgrounds. Maybe both are Indian students, age 18, both from Delhi. Okay, then in such cases, maybe they would like similar things. It would recommend similar things to them. So these are going to be user-based collaborative filtering. Okay, so some work was done on that. We've seen how it works. Then coming to these deeper neural networks. So you have neural networks now which are going to be used to actually understand association between users or between items. Okay, so some of these models that you have are, we'll see soon, there are many types of neural networks which are actually used. Okay, but one of them can be something which is called a restrictive Boltzmann model. So if you look at your Boltzmann model, these are like your neural networks. One node is connected to every other node. Okay, but the interactions between users or items, when you're looking at, say, people who are on Amazon, we can think it could be tens of thousands of people. So to look at such similarities becomes difficult. So that is why we're filtering it, putting it into a second layer. You have something which is called a Boltzmann machine. So you have visible units and hidden units. Why it is called restrictive is interactions are going to be only between one layer and the next, not within that layer. Okay, so we're bringing some amount of order to total chaos by using this restrictive Boltzmann model. So again, by using PyTorch, which was the framework, okay, we've actually given some sample input, like I told you, that movie lens data set, and we have seen how this particular model works. That is your restrictive Boltzmann machine. Okay, then the next thing that we did is we've used another framework. The previous framework was using PyTorch. Same thing, we use collaborative filtering by using your Keras model. So Keras is again going to be a framework. Okay, it provides a Python interface. This is built on top of TensorFlow. Okay, so these are all different frameworks. So Google would have come up with something, Facebook uses something else. Okay, so likewise, so these are different, so Keras, PyTorch, TensorFlow. Okay, these are different frameworks which are available, and all of them support Python, most of them, and most of them will have their own machine learning libraries. So these are all platforms which are user-friendly for anybody working with machine learning, because you don't have to go into the detail. If it's a decision tree, you don't have to actually construct a decision tree. There's ready-made packages which are available, which will allow you to create a decision tree in no time. Okay, same thing with convolution neural network. You can just specify how many layers you want, how many nodes in each layer, indicate the connection between the layers, and quickly you're able to come up with a complete neural network. So this is the Keras framework. So we used Keras and came up with certain recommendations from this. Okay, the next thing, another form of a deep neural network that we used was your multi-layered perceptron. So you can see we've used nothing but a neural network that you used. So we used a neural network over here and came up with the recommendation. Okay, then finally we are doing a comparison. That is what we were doing in this work. So this was how that particular network was designed. So maybe I'll just skip through all this, but you can see Okay, when we are training it, we are checking the performance of the system by looking at the loss. So you can see that the loss is constantly going to keep reducing as the number of epochs increases. Okay, so we have to identify where you have to stop kind of overfitting your network, where you can stop with this. So this would happen. So this is the layer or the architecture of our multi-layer perceptron, and we again did the training for this. So once we were able to get the recommendations for different movies, and then finally we had a comparison between our traditional models and the deep learning networks. So we used your content-based collaborative filtering, which was the traditional model, and we used the deep learning model, that is Keras, multi-layer perceptron, and the restricted Boltzmann machine. Okay, so using this, we were then able to compare among your deep neural networks. We were able to see this was the loss that we are looking at. Okay, so here in this case, you can see the restricted Keras has the highest loss. Okay, this is going to be your restricted Boltzmann machine. So it had a loss of just about 0.188. So here we can see restricted Boltzmann performed much better than your Keras model. Okay, so this was our conclusion for the given particular data sets that we have used. Okay, the next thing that I would like to discuss over here. So this is again moving on to the same thing of recommender system. So now we have the basics. We've understood the basics. The next thing that we have done over here is we've tried to build accurate and scalable CTR. CTR is click-through rate. So how we have loss. Loss is one of the parameters. Accuracy is another parameter. Click-through rate is another parameter in which we evaluate the performance of a recommender system. Okay, so this is for a real-time recommender system. So this is the current work that is being done by a PhD scholar who's working under me. So if in case we're looking at real-time ads, okay, see many times when you are surfing, okay, you will see that certain ads pop up. So this is a completely revenue-generated industry, and which spawns thousands of dollars in terms of revenue for companies. So what generally happens over here is, if in case a user, okay, some ads keep popping up, if in case you happen to click on a particular link, what generally happens is that particular company will give a certain share of, they have a certain percentage that they would be giving to whichever, there's the website, maybe if it is Google, okay, they'll have some revenue which is going to be given to Google. So this is because it is associated with business for companies. It becomes a very, very critical industry where accuracy is very important, where scalability is very important. So if in case we look at this, okay, there is a workflow that happens over here. So the first thing, somebody is browsing a website, he will see a particular ad, okay, and he, in this case, maybe he requests for an ad, okay, he's just requesting for something. So what happens is, this goes to a real-time bidding ad exchange, okay, so this also does this task of auctioning. So what this real-time bidder will do, he will say, okay, somebody is looking for air tickets, okay, so he will send this bid request. Here, in this case, this is a demand-side platform, okay, so multiple people, maybe ClearTrip is there, Make My Trip is there, likewise so many different people are there. So each one of them will come up with a bid, like it's an auction. So they will say, okay, I am ready to, okay, my bid is going to be, if somebody clicks on this, I am going to be bidding, say 0.4, okay, so maybe 0.4 paisa or $0.4, 0.4 dirhams, whatever, okay. So different people will give their bid price. So all this comes over here to this auction. Okay, this auction will then see among these which is going to be giving the highest price. So depending upon somebody says 0.4, somebody says 0.44. Okay, then they will select 0.44 as the higher bid. So somebody will win, and that information is sent back to the billing agent. Okay, and this it is also going to be sent to the user. So he wins. You will specify to him that you have won. Now I'm going to be showing your ad, and that particular company's ad is going to be shown to this particular user. Okay, and if this ad is shown and the user clicks, then there is going to be a feedback that is given to him, and he would have to give some amount of revenue to this auction, okay, to this ad exchange person. So this is the entire process that happens in terms of your real-time bidding. So you can see it is a highly dynamic process. And though there are some 6-7 like here we can see some 5-6 steps which happen, but all this should happen, okay, in most of the cases they have a cutoff time of 100 milliseconds. Within 100 milliseconds, their entire operation should take place. That includes the network delay that we have. Okay, so that is why this becomes a very challenging operation. That is why there are so many different types of neural networks, faster, more efficient neural networks, which are currently working in this particular area. So we have actually worked in two particular areas. One is accuracy, second is scalability. Okay, scalability, why? Because these companies can be showing thousands of ads. Okay, like if you're looking at something like Amazon or Netflix or anything, there can be thousands of such products. Okay, so they should quickly be able to come up with recommendations. So one thing is accuracy. They should come up with good recommendation because the person most likely clicks, right? That becomes very important. So like I was telling you, we have one estimate for how efficient or how accurate your particular system is, which is called your CTR, or a click-through rate. Now, what is click-through rate? Click-through rate is going to be the total, how many times do you click, divided by how many ads have they shown you. Okay, so the higher the click rate, the higher the accuracy. That is, you were shown, say, a total of 4 ads, but you have clicked 3 out of 4 ads. So the click-through rate becomes 75%. Okay, that will indicate that it is a good recommender system. But if it happens that they've shown you 14 ads, you haven't clicked a single one, it will become 0% accurate. Okay, so that is what is your click-through rate. So like we discussed, there are many different deep neural networks, because 100 millisecond is the cutoff time. Even if you are able to increase a system by 0.001 millisecond, okay, there's still some progress, still some improvement. That is why lots of different people are working in these particular areas. Okay, so these are going to be different types of deep neural networks. So you can see this is logistic regression, factorization machine, invented in the years 2010. So these were not the deep networks, but from 2016, you can see constantly people are coming with different kinds of neural networks. So if in case you look at this first network, maybe we'll just discuss this. You have a wide and deep neural network. So here in this case, you can see this is practically used by Google in their Google Play Store. So in the Play Store also, there are thousands of applications. But whenever a user comes to the Play Store window, he should be given only the most suitable apps should be recommended to him. So this wide and deep network, Google has tested it, they are using it, and they've seen that very quickly, okay, in a matter of a few milliseconds, about in 13 milliseconds, they're able to reduce millions of applications to a few hundreds and display it to the user. Okay, so why is it called wide and deep? Because there are two components. One part of it is the wide part, one part of it is the deep part. Okay, wide is going to be the part, okay, where it can be kind of learning the concepts. Deep is going to be where it kind of generalizes. Okay, if in case a person clicks this, it kind of generalizes, like how in our learning you see a particular animal. Okay, by generalizing, you know that a dog would have this kind of height, this features. So if you see any other type of a dog also, you can classify. Okay, so the concept of generalization is very important in these neural networks. So this wide and deep neural network has that ability of actually learning concepts by using the deep part or using the wide part, and it has a concept of learning or generalization by using the deep part of this neural network. Okay, so one of these networks that we have is the wide and deep. The second is going to be a deep cross. Okay, so each one of them is a slight improvement. Like I told you, if a particular architecture can somehow increase the accuracy of a particular recommender system, even if by a very small fraction, it still becomes a very big contribution. Okay, so you can have something else which is called a deep factorization machine. This is their architecture. Okay, you have extreme deep factorization machine. This is the architecture. So you can see they've used some CNN model, okay, CNN layers and different things. Okay, but these are different companies would have come and they have tested. Okay, so these are all obtained from different research papers. So each one of them is a architecture which is tested, tried, published somewhere. Okay, very reputable. You have your attention factorization machine. Okay, this is the architecture for it. You have an adaptive network. Okay, so this is an auto-int. So each one of them, the architecture was slightly different. So you can see these are going to be different forms of architectures that you have. So this was another part of our work. So what we have done, because each of these architectures, if you see, like if you look at these previous methods, then it is such a large neural network. So it becomes very, very difficult to actually have this in a real system, because what happens is so much of computation will take place. So what we are trying to do over here is we've come up with this work, which is going to be another technique which is published again by Hinton. Okay, Hinton again is a very powerful researcher who's working with Google. So Hinton's concept was of knowledge distillation. So what he specified in knowledge distillation is you can have these deep neural networks. Okay, and in this case you can see, okay, so these you can have what is called a teacher and a student model. So a teacher model is going to be all these deep neural networks. So your wide and deep, okay, a deep factorization machine, extreme deep factorization machine, anything. Okay, so these are going to be your teacher model. From the teacher model, you can have a student model who's learning only the important concepts. So what is it? We say it is the concept of distilling. Okay, so distillation, what is distillation? You're putting a lot of fluid in say a test tube, you boil it, okay, it will finally distill and you'll get only the concentrated part from it. So that is what happens over here. From these big teacher models, we are distilling, we're learning important characteristics, and we come up with what is going to be called a distillation loss, and you come up with a smaller, lighter model which is able to learn the important characteristics of the teacher model, but it is much smaller, it is easy to be deployed anywhere. Okay, so you have a teacher model and you have a student model. We have tested this using, again, commonly available data sets, Criteo and Avazo. And here in this case, you have this distillation, and once you have this, we do a loss. Okay, so we check what is going to be the loss from your distilled model and the overall model. Check the loss of your teacher signal of this and of this model, and you compare. Okay, and we saw that the model that we were able to come up with was performing almost as good as that of the teacher model. Okay, so here again what we did is, instead of just taking only one or two of these teacher models, we created an ensemble. So what is an ensemble? We combined 2-3 of these kind of networks, got one network, and then that was going to be used. We were distilling from that ensemble and then using it to train our recommender system. Okay, now again, when we're looking at ensemble, there were 3 ways in which we could do this. One was you taking the average of all 3 equally. There's a weighted average. A particular model is given more weightage. Or then there was another way in which it could be done, which was a gated ensemble. Okay, so we were using this particular formula, giving certain weight for each of the models. So we took an ensemble of 5 of the best deep neural networks and created a small student network. Okay, so that is what we did. So the data sets you can see, Criteo has about 46 million records with 39 fields, okay, and 1 million features. Okay, similarly, Avazo had 40 million cases, so it's really big data, okay, with 22 fields and so many features. Okay, out of this, so this they have captured again for click-through rate, and they have seen a positive class of 26 and 17% in both of this. Then we have divided our data set. So we tried with both these data sets. We've divided the data set into a 80-10-10. Okay, so 80% was used for training, 10% validation, 10% for testing. And the training machine that we used was NVIDIA. We used this on Amazon Cloud. Okay, so it makes use of T4 GPU, and it had 16 GB. Okay, 16 GB memory. The framework was PyTorch. So here you can see these were all the deep neural networks that we have used. So this was just your linear regression, factorization machine, and all these deep neural networks. Okay, so we've used it with both the data sets. We've used both measures of calculating accuracy and log loss, and we have got these specific values. okay, using these different techniques. So you had, this was with your teacher. Okay, so if in case we go back, here in this case, you can see this was our weight ensemble. Okay, so we got the weight ensemble, and this was just from the teacher model. This was with the student model. So you can see the student model is much lighter than the parent model or the teacher model. And you can see performance wise also, it is performing nearly as good as that as your teacher model. Okay, but it is much lighter. Since it is lighter, it becomes easy to actually deploy it in any real-time recommender system. Okay, so that is the main benefit that we had over here. So the next thing that we see is scalability. So and like we just discussed, these recommender systems, irrespective of how many such items are there, okay, within this fraction of a time, that is 100 milliseconds, they must be able to give, they should give the response. Okay, if they do not give it within this 100 milliseconds, it is no point, however good your neural network is, if it is not able to keep up with this criteria. So this 100 milliseconds is something that is very important. So this was how we actually tested for our scalability. Like I told you, we've used the PyTorch framework. And in this PyTorch framework, we've used both CPU and GPU. So we've used about, I think, 16 virtual GPUs and one Tesla GPU. Okay, so this was, and we were, this was PyTorch, which is on top of TensorFlow. And we were using both the data sets, that is Criteo and Avereo. And in this case, what happens over here is, so this is the entire Triton framework, it is called. So here you can see, you can request for any number of GPUs, any number of CPUs. Okay, but this is again on Amazon Cloud, so it is a paid service. Okay, you have to pay for this service. And the important thing that it has is it has an interface in front. So with this interface, a client can request that I want this particular framework. Okay, I want to use, say, this particular algorithm. So maybe your X, wide and deep. And I want to be using 2 GPUs. You can specify all this. Okay, and the important thing of this Triton framework is it will actually give you statistics about the utilization of this network, the throughput, latency, etc. Okay, so this becomes very important in all our real-time applications. Okay, so with respect to latency, we were again able to see that we tested for all our normal models. So you can see, if you see wide and deep, okay, you can see these are the items per request. When it is a small number of items, wide and deep is able to perform well. But if you have 2048 items, if you have 4096 items, okay, you can see it exceeds that 100 millisecond threshold. Okay, it's taking 150 millisecond. So it cannot scale up to this number of items. Okay, but it becomes important in a real-time application that you should have a large number of items and good recommender systems for them. Okay, so here you can see, so all these you can see. So even if you're looking at attentional factorization machine, you can see as soon as it reaches 512 items, it's not able to scale up. Okay, so it loses over there. So this is going to be the last network that we did. This is our student model. You can see we have taken an ensemble of 5 of the best performing deep neural networks. We've got the student model, which is our deep neural network, we're calling it over here. This just has 2 layers and each layer has 32 neurons. Okay, so here you can see it is very easily scaling up. Okay, even when you have close to 5,000 items over here, okay, or 4,100 items, you can see it is doing this within the time frame of 100 milliseconds. Okay, so you can see that this is a perfect model. So in terms of our computation, you can see that these are 2 ways in which we were evaluating. One is millions of additions. So this is multiplications and additions that happen. And this is the number of parameters that is used. Okay, so those of you all who have worked with neural networks, you will see neural networks is basically going to be a lot of different, TensorFlow is nothing but a lot of matrix operations. Okay, so a lot of multiplications, additions, and also we see that there are going to be large number of parameters. So you can see wide and deep, if you see, okay, this is in terms of complexity, and you can compare it with our student network. So you can see the number of operations and the number of parameters is so much lower. Okay, so that is why in terms of these real-time applications, no, this network, the student model that we have come up, will be able to both perform accurately as well as scale very well. Okay, so this is what we've done. Actually, you can see our deep neural network that we have come up shows accuracy is better than any individual model. It shows accuracy to be close to the ensemble model, and it is lightweight and scalable to any model and ensemble. Okay, so this is with respect to this. So these are the references that we have used here. So we've come up with two papers, and we have actually submitted it to conferences. Okay, we're waiting to hear back from them. So this is the outcome of this work. The last thing that I would know, maybe very quickly, just maybe 2-3 minutes I will just take for this, is the last form of continuing with your recommender system itself. Like I was telling you, you have something which is called reinforcement learning. Okay, so reinforcement learning is now seen to be a very commonly used form because so far we have supervised and unsupervised. Okay, now in supervised, what happens? You must have those big data sets like what we saw now, Criteo, okay, which has 40 million records. So if you want a system to perform well, you should have a good data set. So here in this case, like if in case you're talking about teaching somebody to cycle, how do you tell him, okay, to cycle? He has to actually sit and cycle. Similarly, if it is teaching a child to walk, you cannot say put your left leg, left leg, balance yourself. Okay, the child has to experience this and then learn to balance and walk. So that is what these recommender systems are. They're basically used for applications where having a big data set to have supervised learning becomes very difficult. Okay, so in recommender systems, you don't have a data set. The system kind of learns itself. This is becoming very popular in a lot of our video games. Okay, Atari games and all that. So games is one. Nowadays, even in our driverless cars, self-driving cars, okay, a lot of these applications are using reinforcement learning. So we have actually come up with a small sample. So again, this was a project student's work. He's actually come up with, he's used reinforcement learning to come up with a recommendation for music. Okay, so like something like Spotify, or if you're listening to music somewhere, it will recommend, and it's using reinforcement learning. So there is an Android application also that has been developed over here. So very quickly, if I just have to go through this, okay. So here we can see under reinforcement learning, if in case I look at this slide, no, you can see this is the reinforcement learning algorithm. There are multiple. So like how we have supervised learning. Nowadays, you see there was before it was only neural networks. Then we had those Boltzmann machines. Then you had CNN, RNN. Then you have so many different types now. Encoders, decoders, you have gated recurrent networks. Okay, same way, in reinforcement learning also, there is a big category. Okay, so mainly two broad categories. It is model-free and model-based. Okay, and again, you have policy gradient and you have something which is called Q-learning. Then these techniques that you have, this is deep policy gradient. Okay, or there are techniques which is a combination of these two. So there is many different algorithms that is there. But before that, so you can see, if in case we come to this reinforcement learning, important thing to know is there is no kind of testing and training data. There is no teacher. Okay, so it is not a supervised learning. So this is going to be the environment that you have for a reinforcement learning. You have an agent, you have a state space, you have a policy, and you can have what is called a reward. Okay, so this is basically what it is. So these are the different, like I told you, many different algorithms which are available. So people have used different forms. So in your, like you say that Google Go, the game of Go that was, so DeepMind. DeepMind has used a form of reinforcement learning to come up with their application. Okay, so what we have used here, you have the deep deterministic policy gradient. Okay, and another technique that we have is something which is going to be called your actor and critic model. So this is again a different form of reinforcement learning. So this you can compare it to being something like, you're letting a child just play in a playground. You're leaving him in the playground. The child can play with the soil. He can go to a swing. He can go to a slide. He can eat something. Okay, he can do anything. Maybe he hits another child. And then you have a critic, maybe in the form of parents, who are just observing this child and based on their reaction. So if the child is doing something bad, maybe they shout at him. Okay, if he's doing something good, they praise him. So in such cases, the child will then slowly learn. Okay, I'm sharing my toys with somebody, that's good. Okay, I'm trying to hit somebody, that is wrong. So the child learns. So this is the concept that we have of the actor-critic model. So again, if you're looking at this actor-critic model, okay, you can look into it for more details, but the algorithm is there with very specific steps of how you can be implementing this. So we've actually worked with this actor-critic model. We've implemented this algorithm. Okay, and this is basically the application. So that is at the back end. So you have this application. In the front end, what we did is we had an Android application which was built. So the Android application is going to be the front end, which will be using this model at the back end. It will use a database. Okay, so the database could be a Firebase database, which it is going to be using, and it will come up with recommendations for the user. So again, this project that we have was again developed from TensorFlow. Okay, you will log the event onto the database. So it will start by sending analytics data. So what is the user listening to? Okay, it collects all this information and it collects it into your Firebase. It logs the events. Then you have BigQuery. So BigQuery, you have this Google Cloud Console, which works with BigQuery. So BigQuery will kind of query the data information that is logged, and we'll see what is it that he's frequently hearing. If he's hearing, say, pop music, for how long is he hearing? Okay, if he's listening to jazz, how long is he hearing? So it is querying this, and then it will give back the user the feedback. Okay, so it will import this model. This is how this was all done. And in the form of your front end, it is going to be just a Google application that you have, which is going to be connected to the playlist of the user. It will also keep collecting information about the frequently heard songs. And this is going to be analyzed using your actor-critic model. Okay, that is the machine learning model that is used over here. So it is using reinforcement learning. It will then come up with the recommendation to a particular user. So here you can see when a user likes a song, maybe he gives a heart. Okay, when he doesn't like, he says he doesn't like a particular song. Okay, so based on this, it kind of learns what kind of music that he likes, and then it will recommend suitable songs to him. Okay, so this was the last part of the work. So I think I just finished right in time. So this again, we have now submitted it to a conference for, and it is under review. Okay, so this is the work that I would like to share with all of you. Anybody has any specific questions, I'll be more than happy to take it. If I can clear your doubts, if I can help you in any way, I'll be more than happy. So any queries, any questions, kindly feel free to ask.
Yeah, if any participant want to ask in chat also, it's fine. Else they can ask also.
I hope it was okay, not too much of information.
No, ma'am, it was very nice.
Yeah, okay. Now, anybody wants to connect with me after this also, you can kindly feel free to drop me a mail. I'll be more than happy to get back to you.
Yes.
I'll get back to you.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you then.
Thank you so much, madam.
Yeah, and thank you to Dr. Manish, Dr. Dave, and the entire team from your university, Raksha University. Thank you for having taken this effort in coming up with such an interesting and a useful set of series of talks.
And we are also grateful to have you.
All the
Madam.
best.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, bye. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Yes, madam.